Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to Beyond the Veil, a podcast on psychic protection, spiritual hygiene, and navigating the ebbs and flows of the healing journey as you learn to master both your sovereign and shadow selves. My name is Lauren Unearth, your host, and today we're diving into one of the most overlooked, arguably most important stories in all of spiritual history, and that is the story of Sophia. And not just as a symbol of wisdom, but as a central figure in Gnostic cosmology, whose choices, experiences, and suffering ultimately shaped the reality that we lived in. This is a deep dive on Gnosticism. And in last week's episode, I briefly touched on Gnosticism. And in that moment, I just knew I barely scratched the surface and truly could have kept going. But I decided to kind of make it its own separate story because there's so much to it. So we'll dive deeper into this. And again, this all ties into everything. Our talks about the Archons, the false light, the past episodes on the Book of Enoch, and kind of a continuation of where we left off there. So if you're new here, I would recommend going and listening to those episodes, kind of catching up, and then come back to this. Because these Gnostic viewpoints tell a very different story of Genesis in the Old Testament, the creation story, the story of Adam and Eve. And just as a refresh from last week, they believe that we live in a fragmented and inherently flawed or corrupt reality that was not created by the ultimate benevolent source, but rather by a lesser malevolent being known as the demiurge. Gnosticism emerged as this diverse network of philosophical and mystical traditions that they say began around 100 BCE to 300 CE, with roots that, for me, what I see stretch way earlier than that. So it predates the institutionalized Christianity, but it did become kind of entangled with early Christian thought, which really is just the Christ teachings before the Romans came in and added their thoughts and ideas, and then Christianity was born, right? So these teachings attributed to where Christ appears not as this sacrificial savior, but as a bringer of gnosis, this direct experiential knowledge of the divine. These teachings, these ancient warnings about a false god, a cosmic system designed to deceive and enslave, has been around so long. The truth is right here for us. And they've echoed through these sacred texts, the mystery schools, the suppressed scriptures. Yet the modern world continues to worship power structures built in the image of what they call the Yaldabaoth, this rigid, punitive, hierarchical, fear-based being. And I'm going to refer to this being as Yahweh, but that's the name that they have in their text. So the fundamental belief of Gnosticism, the fundamental beliefs are the material world is a corrupted or illusory realm, not created by the one true God. The ultimate source is ineffable, meaning too great to be expressed or described in words. Liberation and salvation do not come through worship or obedience, but through gnosis, the experiential, intuitive, and soul level knowledge of the divine. They believe that humans contain a divine spark trapped in a physical body, manipulated by lesser beings. And the myth of Sophia, a divine feminine figure who falls from grace and creates the material world unintentionally, and we'll get to that, right? The concept of the Archons, the parasitic entities that serve Yahweh, the false creator god, and block spiritual ascension. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, but let's break it down, starting with the material world as a corrupt illusion. So They call the divine realm the Pleroma, which translates to fullness. It's not a physical place, it's a metaphysical state of pure divine energy, no distortions. It's the realm of pure spirit, pure white light, beyond space time, fragmentation, and duality. There is complete harmony here with Source. They call Source or God the monad, and they believe the world we live in was created by a being that has mistaken itself for the true monad, and just generally believes that the entire universe that we live in contains flaw. Within the Pleroma, the realm of pure light, are entities called eons. The eons are emanations of the monad that embody specific aspects of divine consciousness. The eons are not creations in the sense of beings made from raw material, but emanations, meaning these spiritual intelligences or archetypal forces that flow directly out of the monad without separation or division. And each eon expresses this unique attribute of the divine, like mind, truth, wisdom, silence, grace, life. They are cosmic principles, each with a distinct role in maintaining the structure of divine reality. And they are arranged in syzygies. I think I said that right, syzygies, which are male-female pairs that represent complementary polarities. They believe that wholeness comes from relational balance. So examples of this include depth and silence, which represent the monad's foundation, and then this mystery, the mind and truth, word and life, the organizing speech of divine reason, and then the living energy that brings it to life, right? And then, of course, Christ and Sophia are eons as well. So together they constitute this full architecture of divine intelligence. The Pleroma is a self-sustaining field of divine archetypes, a blueprint of harmony, void of desire, ignorance, and error. Nothing in the Pleroma suffers, decays, or forgets its origin, its divine order. And I believe this is what others refer to as heaven, the realm of God. Then you have the Kenoma, which means emptiness, and that is the opposite of the Pleroma. This is the realm into which the false god and the Archons rule. This is kind of where we are right now, right? And includes the material world. So, of course, this planet is a beautiful consciousness of divine light who has agreed to allow this to play out here. And there is heaven here, but there's also a deeply flawed reality that overlays on top of this planet. And we've been told, oh, it's about duality. You have to, alchemize duality and understand duality. But I'm seeing it a little bit differently. I don't really feel it's about duality, but rather polarity. Polarity exists in the higher dimensions, duality in the lower. And I feel like we've been deceived into believing duality is normal and godly, but I really think it's more about polarity. So duality refers to this framework of opposites that are perceived as separate, conflicting, and also mutually exclusive, such as good versus evil, light versus dark, spirit versus matter. And in this model, and how we are perceiving subconsciously, unconsciously, one side is typically judged as superior while the other is condemned, repressed, and feared, right? Duality creates division. It creates shame and this sense of moral hierarchy that leads to conflict internally and externally. And spiritually, it reflects a fragmented state of awareness, one where the whole is split into opposing parts. Many esoteric and Gnostic traditions view duality as an illusion, or the word they call it is Maya, which makes me think of the Mayans, this distorted this distortion of truth maintained by egoic consciousness and false light systems. It's not the nature of reality, but a mental framework that keeps us in cycles of judgment, fear, and separation. In contrast, polarity refers to the dynamic interplay of two complementary forces that exist within a unified whole. Unlike duality, polarity does not imply opposition, but relationship. This natural tension that generates movement, creativity, and growth. Examples of polarity include the masculine and feminine, the inhale and the exhale, the light and the shadow, the expansion and contraction. There's no moral judgment on polarity. Neither side is better or more divine than the other, but instead each pole plays a role in the larger dance of wholeness. Polarity is the mechanism through which energy flows and evolves. And with duality, it's the mechanism through which energy separates and fragments. True healing and embodiment arise from not choosing one pole over the other, but honoring both, bringing them into conscious balance and union. So where duality fractures, polarity integrates. Where duality judges, polarity harmonizes. So it's very possible that duality is kind of like this false separation that leads to conflict and control, and it's used by distorted systems to manipulate and disempower. Polarity, however, is the sacred rhythm of life, inviting us into a more whole experience of being. The journey of awakening involves recognizing and dissolving the illusion of duality while learning to work with polarity as a force of integration, embodiment, and spiritual maturity. Okay, now let's get into Sophia, one of the main eons who was kind of positioned near the boundary of the Pleroma, who ultimately diverges from this order. So the story is Sophia has this deep longing and acts without her polarity counterpart, which is the Logos or Christ, which causes a breach in cosmic order. And this longing causes her to create something, which was the Yaldabaoth or Yahweh, who goes on to create the material universe as a flawed reflection of the Pleroma, setting the stage for the entrapment of souls into matter. And understanding the Pleroma is essential because it forms the template of divine reality. It shows us and reminds us that the origin of all things is not chaos or chance, but layered fields of living intelligence where every emanation is ordered, paired, and in resonance with the source. The material world that we experience in this view is not the original creation, but a distortion, this shadow that has been cast from a place of forgotten perfectionism, a copy as best as this being could of the living intelligence. So our soul carries the light of Sophia. She longs to remember and return into that primordial wholeness. But we live in a world of organized chaos, right? There is divine order here. But this world was not a creation of God directly, but by a creation of a creation of a creation of God. And I have always felt that this is a realm of error and that has gotten a little bit out of control here, right? So the Sophia creates Yahweh, and then they believe that this false creator being created the Archons or the rulers to then govern various aspects of creation, from planetary spheres to human psychology. They don't see him as pure evil, but ignorant. And if you listen to the episodes on the Book of Enoch, where Enoch was taken to the higher realms and saw the heavens and the beings that control the weather, and yeah, it's very possible that it's all archonic, right? It wasn't actually the true heavens that he was taken to. because I keep coming back to weather manipulation and controlling the weather. And yes, it has gotten much worse, but I feel like these dark forces have always controlled and manipulated the weather to some degree. And I keep coming back to Enoch being brought to these realms that were just more AI systems, this archonic control of the weather and other things as well, like the planets. And I just keep seeing this little visual of me as this like speck on the planet Earth, and then expanding out and out and out and out, and just being shown that this false reality and world of error goes much farther than just Earth itself. So Yahweh, the false creator God, creates the Archons, who appoint the Watchers. Remember how I was saying how why would the one true God appoint these angels that so easily fell from grace? I don't get it. Why would he do that? How would he not know? And well, it makes a lot more sense that it was never the one true God who did this, but Yahweh, or whatever name it goes by. I'm using Yahweh because my ties to all of this are with the Holy Family. So we're going a little bit biblical here. But the Archons are responsible for maintaining the reality, constructing the false systems, the material distractions to keep humans ignorant of their divine origin. The Gnostics also believe that the human body is created by the Archons, but it was Sophia who infused it with the divine spark, a remnant of the Pleroma, a remnant of Christ, of God, or the spark of God. I don't want to say remnant because it is not a remnant. The spark that is the true self, the fragment of divine consciousness encased in matter and subject to reincarnation and suffering until awakened through gnosis. And this is in line what I believe, what I talked about in the podcast episode about the one true God, that we are not God in its whole form, but a fragment of. Now, I'm still sitting with this information that Sophia, the divine feminine as we know her, birthed the false creator God, but just stay with me. I'm telling the story. So in New Age teachings, Sophia is seen as this embodiment of divine feminine wisdom, representing the sacred intelligence of the universe, the soul of the world, the feminine face of God, right? And that's what we were all taught. And in New Age mythology, she's also the archetype who oversees the return of the divine feminine on Earth, this guiding force behind the planetary awakening, the supporting the rise of heart-centered consciousness, sacred sexuality, womb wisdom, and the dismantling of the patriarchal control systems. And this is true, she is, but there's more to the story with her. And the story goes that she was driven by a yearning to know the unknowable source deeper, and attempts to generate something from within herself, this act of creation outside of divine order. Again, this act was not motivated by evil, but out of a deep longing, curiosity, and this unbalanced desire, what some ancient texts call passion or misdirected impulse. I still don't fully understand the why. I feel like a lot of the texts are very vague, but I'm going to continue to go deep with this and we'll share more as it comes. But what we know now is due to that desire, she brings forth this being, this blind God. And unlike other eons, he is created in ignorance, without awareness of divine fullness, and in this incomplete, deformed state, because she was not honoring divine polarity. Some ancient texts also describe him as a lion face, reptilian, a serpent, and also some that he had 7 powers or heads, which represent the planetary archons that he later creates and the 7 deadly sins, perhaps. So horrified by what Sophia created, this ignorant, arrogant being disconnected from divine order. She tries to hide him by casting him out of the Pleroma into the chaotic lower realms, which also tells us these lower realms already existed, maybe, right? Because he was created outside of the Pleroma and has no knowledge of any reality higher than himself. So he declares, I am God, there is no other God besides me. Not knowing there was anything above him, he imitates what he could sense from the higher realms and built a universe, our universe, that is both beautiful and broken. The great inversion begins or continues. And that's the difference between some souls, including human souls, right? We're born out of divine order with no knowledge of the higher realms, while others were, and they remember it more. But we all have that spark within us, but not all of us were born of that. So believing him to be the true source, Yahweh creates the material universe as a distorted mirror of the higher realms, and Sophia witnesses him unable to actually bring those creations to life. So she kind of secretly breathes divine light into Adam, the human he created, right? The story of Adam and Eve. And this leads us to that story in that moment. Before I get there, because we are going to get into it, I just want to include some interpretations from the Book of Enoch, even Sumerian mythology, post-Gnostic, occult systems, right? Just kind of tying it all together, because the Archons, and I saw this as well, and it's really nice to have these texts kind of confirm things. I'm like, the Archons are the fallen angels, like there's no separation. And they are also identified as such in those texts. So these beings who descended to earth took on form, intermingled with human women, producing the offspring known as the Nephilim. The Nephilim were depicted as giant, destructive, spiritually corrupted hybrids, embodiments of chaos, war, and domination. And they fragmented from divine order and became lost spirits, what we now call demonic entities or earthbound interdimensional parasites. I believe the planets themselves are also extensions of these Nephilim energies, perhaps even literal embodiments of fallen archonic consciousness, because they gave us astrology, right? Follow the stars and the zodiac, they said. So I know I'm not the first person to make this connection, obviously, as it is talked about in these interpretations of planetary intelligences as gods, quote unquote, who were worshipped in ancient Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, all civilizations that we know were ruled by dark forces. So another belief I hold is that the Anunnaki, the Greek gods, the Sumerians, the Romans, the Nephilim are the exact same souls reincarnating. This successive cultural expression of the same root force, the fallen, hybridized, Archon descended bloodlines created from Yahweh who came to rule the earth. These are the solar cults, the elite bloodlines, the priest kings and warlords who maintain control through religion, technology, distorted esoteric knowledge. And some of them are still here. A lot of them are still here now in the human bodies of presidents and Hollywood elites. And Thoth, which we talked about last episode, right? Seen as this bringer of wisdom and writing, fits into this web as well, because I believe Thoth is not a benevolent god, but a Nephilim ruler, this magician who encoded distortion under the guise of spiritual enlightenment. As a keeper of records and initiations, he was involved and led engineering spiritual systems that mimic light but subtly entrap the soul, what some might call false light technology. So in summary, the sequence kind of goes like this. Sophia, acting alone, births Yahweh, who then creates the Archons, who then become the Watchers and fallen angels, who then produce the Nephilim, who manifest on earth as bloodlines, gods, and empires, including the Anunnaki, Sumerians, Greeks, Romans, and more. These beings fractured from the organic divine order and now roam as demonic intelligences, still influencing our world through hidden systems, technologies, and beliefs. I don't know, guys, it just like rings true for me, but you decide, right? Let's get into the story of Adam and Eve. So in Gnostic mythology, the story of Adam and Eve is not interpreted as a tale of disobedience and sin, but as this deeply symbolic account of humanity's divine potential and its entrapment into false creation. So they believe Adam was not created by the true God, but by the demiurge Yahweh and his Archons. They shaped the body from earthly matter, but they were unable to bring him to life. And it was Sophia, out of compassion and a desire to redeem what has been distorted, who breathed that spark of divine light, her own essence, into Adam. And this spark made Adam far more intelligent and luminous than what the Archons intended. And that began to threaten them because it was so much more powerful than them. So in response, the Archons attempted to neutralize this divine potential by creating Eve, intending her to be this trap or companion to keep Adam distracted and under their control. However, the plan backfired as Eve did not comply and now plays this crucial role in awakening Adam to his true nature. In this version of the myth, also, the tree of knowledge is not forbidden because it brings sin, but because it leads to gnosis, right? The inner liberating knowledge that exposes the false creator's lies. And when Adam and Eve fall, it's not because they disobeyed a divine command, but because they began to wake up. And then this awakening exposes the artificial being. In some accounts, the Archons attempt to violate or dominate Eve, but she transforms herself and escapes, symbolizing the resilience and transformative power of the divine feminine. Eve is not the problem that led to the fall of humanity. She is the solution and the more fully awakened aspect of humanity who remembers where she came from. So Adam and Eve are essentially the prototypes of the human soul, the divine beings trapped in a flawed world, in a flawed body, who must ascend and awaken through gnosis. The idea of original sin kind of gets flipped on its head. Eating the fruit and gaining the knowledge isn't what harms us, it's what begins to wake us up. And the tree of knowledge and the tree of good and evil was not a trap, it was a gateway. So this sacred symbol of discernment, polarity, and capacity to perceive beyond illusion. And it wasn't about morality, it was about consciousness, about developing the inner compass to navigate the false light and shadow of the archonic world. So eating from it, Eve accessed divine awareness, which the false rulers now then sought to suppress. And the serpent, in many Gnostic texts, the serpent is not Satan, the serpent is wisdom, or this emissary of the higher eons sent to guide Eve to awakening. And that's why the expulsion from Eden is not divine punishment, it's the Archon's reaction to a threat. Eve's awakening kind of representing a rupture in the control matrix. And their banishment is the ruler's attempt to suppress that divine spark before it can spread. It wasn't an exile from God. So the tree, far from being a symbol of rebellion against God, becomes the tree of conscious choice or sacred awareness. And the serpent far from being a deceiver, becomes the bringer of light and the guide through illusion. And Eve, in this view, is not the source of sin, but a carrier of Sophia's light, the one who chooses to remember in the midst of a world designed to make her forget. She's the first to see through the veil. This story of Adam and Eve, much like everything, is inverted. We know this. I mean, if you read the King James Version, it literally, to me, sounds like woman, bad, man, good, woman, punish. And I just couldn't even finish it. But anyway, in one of the texts about this story, they introduce Nerea, who is the daughter of Eve and spiritually connected to Sophia. So when the Archons attempt to destroy humanity with a flood, the great flood was not the one true God. This divine messenger kind of intervenes and reveals the true structures of the cosmos to Eve's daughter. So through her, these texts kind of suggest that the knowledge of one's origin and the courage to defy false authority are the keys to liberation. So now, after this creation and the story of Adam and Eve, Sophia falls, metaphorically and physically. Into the lower realms, she becomes trapped in chaos and that she helped create. So in some versions, she forgets who she is. Others say she watches from the edges, kind of full of pain and sorrow of what has happened. But either way, she becomes this prototype for the human soul, divine in origin, lost in the physical world, lost in matter, and kind of represents this war on the feminine, the womb, and the matriarchy. In this text called Pistis Sophia, Sophia is shown kind of wandering through 13 eons of suffering, calling out to the light, asking for help, but also in the process remembering who she was, repenting, not in the Christian sense of sin, but in the sense of longing to return to what's real. Sounds a lot like our own individual journey, right? Eventually, the Christ, not the crucified Jesus, but the cosmic Logos, descends to help her and doesn't save her by force, but reminds her, brings her gnosis, self-knowledge. And that's what begins her ascent back toward the Pleroma, just like Jesus showed all of us how to do for ourselves, right? The second coming of Christ is not another man embodying that energy, it's all of us. Okay, so the world is a trap, but it's not random, it's not punishment, it's a labyrinth which we consciously chose to enter, a cosmic initiation, not because we are naive, but because we were brave, strong. We descended into a fractured, inverted, and often brutal realm, knowing we'd forget who we are, knowing the odds of awakening were slimmer, yet we came anyway for soul growth, for expansion, for evolution, for the mystery of experiencing the return. This descent, this long arc into a flawed and fragmented material realm that veils, distorts, and nearly severs us from our divine origin. It's curriculum. It's the ultimate school and test of inner strength, of clarity, of resilience, of remembrance, of deep inner knowing, to fall into density and choose love anyway, to be surrounded by lies, to lose the thread of truth almost fully, to go searching for it within, with nothing but your own light to guide you back. That is gnosis in motion. That is mastery of the highest kind. So Sophia's story is our story. She is not a myth to worship, but a mirror to study, and represents those moments where we overreach, acted without divine alignment, created out of separation, not in union, and birthed distortion. She is the part of us that maybe thought we could do it alone, the part that wanted to create beauty but accidentally produces chaos, the part that got lost, the part that suffered, right? She laid the template for humanity. but she's also the part that never stopped reaching upward, the part that remembers, restores, returns. The world we live in was not created by accident. It was engineered by distorted will, by a false creator who mistook separation for sovereignty, control for creation. But the light in you was not an accident either, right? That light, that divine spark, that incorruptible divine spark. Although they have been trying to corrupt it, which is why they've infiltrated our soul, our consciousness, our body, everything so deeply, right? It precedes this world. It's older than matter. It's more ancient than fear. And it's more pure than distortion. And it cannot be extinguished, only forgotten. They will never be able to destroy truth fully, but they have tried. And that is why we're at war here on this planet, especially in the Middle East. They are trying to destroy the truth. And when you remember that light, not just as an idea, but as a cell deep knowing, a lived frequency that reshapes how you see, choose, speak, and move, that is Gnosis, this Sophia rising within you, and not the fake new agey spiritual psychosis way. For me personally, this journey I've been on, this fight I've been fighting for myself and for the justice of all living beings, where I have come here 555 times as a human, over and over and over again, experiencing so much torture and abuse from this system, but still kept going. My soul is forever changed in the best way. I understand this whole why we say yes to this. And now I'm going to learn to thrive in this fractured and fragmented world. This journey for all of us is not for the weak. This takes an insane amount of strength, dedication, courage, and discernment. And know that you chose to be here. You're not a victim. So on that note, I think we'll complete for now. And next, we'll get into my own story, my own experience, my version of the fall of Sophia, the fall of Lauren, or Amara, which is my soul name, the fall of Amara, and the rise. So, wow, what a beautiful way to begin telling this journey with a podcast episode explaining my deep inner knowing and sense of self, this reality. And now we're going to get into how I got to come to this truth, why I believe what I do, what I experienced, what I learned along the way. So thank you, as always, for listening, for your trust. Thank you for this safe space that allows me to tell my story. Let me know if this resonates with you, if you are a believer of Gnosticism as well. And I'll see you guys next time for the lore. In the meantime, you can find me at laurenonearth.com and Lauren on Earth on Instagram and TikTok. Okay, see you then. Bye.